When the billionaire walked into his office that morning, he didn't expect to find an old man bleeding on the floor. He didn't expect to see his employees frozen in fear. And he definitely didn't expect to discover that the person everyone just watched get kicked like trash was the only reason he was a billionaire at all. What happened next shocked the entire company. And by the end of the story, you'll never look at power the same way again. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story. It's a mirror. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you a story that will break your heart before it heals it. A story about how we treat people when we think nobody important is watching. It happened in downtown Chicago, inside the shining towers of Sterling Media Group, one of the biggest entertainment companies in America. You know the type of place, right? Glass walls, so clean you could see a reflection. Marble floors that clicked with every expensive shoe that walked across them. The kind of building where everyone looked successful, where everyone seemed to matter. But on this particular morning, one person didn't matter at all. At least, that's what they thought. His name was Papa Joe. Just an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. His clothes were worn but clean. His shoes had walked many miles. His hand shook slightly as he held an old brown cap, squeezing it tight like it was the only thing keeping him steady. He stood near the entrance, not blocking anyone, just trying to pass through quietly. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he just wanted to walk without being noticed. But he was noticed, and not in a good way. Her name was Victoria Cross. And if you worked at Sterling Media, you knew that name meant power. She was tall, elegant, dressed in clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her heels clicked like tiny hammers with every step. When she walked into a room, conversation stopped. When she spoke, people listened, not because they wanted to, but because they were afraid not to. Victoria saw Papa Joe standing there, and something inside her twisted with anger. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she always treated people this way. Either way, what happened next was ugly. She didn't ask him to move. She didn't call security. She just kicked him. Hard. Right in his side. The sound was awful. Not loud like a crash. Not sharp like a slap. Just a dull, heavy thud, like someone kicking a bag of old clothes. Papa Joe flew sideways and hit the marble floor. His thin body crumpled. His head struck the ground, and a small, broken cry escaped from his lips. People gasped, but nobody moved. Nobody helped. Nobody said a word. The office had been busy just seconds before. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people rushing with coffee and papers and important tasks. But the moment Papa Joe fell, everything stopped. The whole building seemed to hold its breath. Papa Joe lay on his side, trembling. Tears rolled down his wrinkled face and disappeared into his gray beard. He held his chest like it hurt to breathe. He tried to speak, but only quiet sobs came out, small and weak, like someone trying not to cry too loudly in public. Victoria stood over him, her face twisted with disgust. "You useless old fool," she snapped. "Are you insane? You want to block this entrance? Look at you, crying like a child." Papa Joe squeezed his eyes shut. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely there. "I just wanted to pass through. I didn't mean any trouble." "Pass through where?" Victoria shouted louder now, making sure everyone heard her power. "This is not some homeless shelter. This is a corporate office. Do you think we run a charity here?" She lifted her foot again, like she might kick him a second time. Papa Joe raised one trembling hand, not to fight back, just to protect his face. The workers watched in horror, but still, nobody moved. Why? Because everyone knew Victoria. She could destroy your career with one phone call. She could make sure you never worked in this industry again with just one word to the right person. Fear lived in that building, and Victoria fed it every single day. Papa Joe's shoulders shook as he cried quietly. His shirt was faded and old. His pants hung loose on his thin frame. He wasn't holding anything, no bag, no ID card, nothing except that old brown cap crushed tight in his grip. He looked lost, like he didn't belong in a place that smelled like expensive perfume and cold air conditioning. Victoria leaned down, her voice low and cruel. "Get out before I call security," she hissed. "Before I make sure you regret ever stepping foot in this place." Papa Joe tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He winced and held his chest tighter, his breathing becoming more difficult. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Are you acting now? You want sympathy?" She turned to the workers, checking if they were still loyal to her power. "And all of you standing there like idiots," she snapped. "If anyone helps him, you'll answer to me personally." Her words were like invisible chains. Even the kind people froze. A young man near the copy machine took one step forward, his hands curling into fists, but his feet stayed glued to the floor. A woman whispered, "This is wrong." Her colleague quickly replied, "Please don't talk. She'll hear you." Papa Joe's sobs grew quieter, like he was trying to disappear into the floor. And then something happened. Something that would change everything. The glass doors at the front entrance clicked softly. Not a loud sound, but somehow everyone heard it. Every head turned toward those doors because they only opened like that when someone truly important arrived. The security guards straightened immediately, their faces changing from casual to alert. A heavy silence fell over the office, deeper and colder than before. And then he walked in. The man who walked through those doors looked like he owned the world, and in many ways he did. His name was Alexander Hayes, but everyone just called him Mr. Hayes. He was the founder and owner of Sterling Media Group, a self-made billionaire who had built an entertainment empire from nothing. He wore a dark suit that fit perfectly, and his watch caught the light as he moved. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes noticed everything. People didn't just respect Alexander Hayes. They feared disappointing him. He was known as fair but unforgiving when it came to cruelty or dishonesty. He had built his company on a simple philosophy: talent and character matter more than anything else. The moment Victoria saw him, her confidence flickered. Just for half a second, but it was there. He wasn't supposed to be here this early. He wasn't supposed to walk in at the exact moment she had done something so terrible. Mr. Hayes took 2 slow steps into the office. His eyes moved from Victoria to the frozen workers, and then down to Papa Joe lying on the floor, clutching his chest, crying quietly like a wounded animal. He stopped. Not in shock. Not in confusion. Just stopped with the kind of stillness that made everyone feel like they were standing before a judge. Victoria's voice suddenly turned sweet, too sweet. "Good morning, sir," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "I didn't know you were coming in today." Mr. Hayes didn't return her greeting. He didn't even look at her. His gaze stayed locked on Papa Joe. Papa Joe opened his eyes and saw him. For a moment, the old man's tears slowed. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, like he recognized the billionaire, or maybe like he had been waiting for him all along. But before he could say anything, his chest tightened again, and he coughed, weak and painful. Several workers flinched at the sound. Finally, Mr. Hayes spoke. His voice was calm, but it cut through the office like a knife. "Security," he said simply. 2 guards rushed forward, their boots quiet on the marble, but their presence heavy. Victoria relaxed slightly, thinking they were about to drag Papa Joe away. Her shoulders lifted with renewed confidence. But then Mr. Hayes said something that made everyone's heart jump. "Help him up," he ordered gently. Victoria blinked. "What?" she whispered, not meaning to say it out loud. The guards hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but they obeyed. One guard knelt carefully and supported Papa Joe's shoulder. The other lifted his arm slowly, like he was holding something precious and fragile. Papa Joe groaned softly. His legs shook as they helped him into a sitting position. Everyone watched like they were witnessing something impossible. And then Alexander Hayes did the most shocking thing anyone had ever seen. He walked closer, bent down, and took a clean white handkerchief from his pocket. With his own hand, he wiped the tears from Papa Joe's face. Not roughly, not quickly, gently, like a son wiping tears from his father's cheeks. The office forgot how to breathe. Someone's phone started ringing in the background. It rang twice before the person quickly silenced it with trembling fingers. Victoria's mouth fell open. Her eyes darted around the room, confused and nervous. Mr. Hayes looked at Papa Joe, his voice dropping to something almost personal. "Papa," he said softly. "You came."
Papa.
He called him Papa, a word that meant father, elder, someone deserving of deep respect. Papa Joe's lips trembled. He looked at Mr. Hayes with wet eyes and whispered something that only the billionaire could hear. Mr. Hayes's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, not with explosive anger, but with the kind that burns slowly and destroys everything in its path. Then he stood up and turned toward Victoria. The entire office held its breath. Victoria forced another smile, but her hands were starting to shake. "Sir, I can explain," she began quickly. "This old man just wandered in, and he was disturbing the entrance, causing problems." Mr. Hayes raised one hand. Just one hand. Victoria's voice died instantly, like someone had pressed mute on her. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "Do you know who you just kicked?" Victoria swallowed hard. The workers leaned forward without realizing it. Even the guards looked tense, waiting. Mr. Hayes's next words came slowly, heavily. "The person you kicked," he said, "is the reason this company exists at all." Victoria's eyes went wide. Papa Joe's breath caught in his throat. Mr. Hayes took one step closer to Victoria, his voice dropping even lower. "You called him useless. You threatened him. You kicked him like trash on the street." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But this old man saved my life and paid for this empire with his own blood." Victoria's knees almost buckled beneath her. And just as everyone tried to process what that meant, Mr. Hayes turned to the security guards and gave an order that made Victoria's face go completely white. "Lock the doors," he said firmly. "Nobody leaves this building until the whole truth is told." The glass doors clicked shut. Hard. Final. Like a prison cell closing. The sound echoed through the office.
Click, click, click.
Victoria's confident posture collapsed. Her shoulders dropped. Her fingers trembled at her sides. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Papa Joe sat in a chair now, supported by a guard, his breathing rough but steadier. His eyes stayed on the floor like he was ashamed to be seen, ashamed that his pain had caused all this trouble. Mr. Hayes stood in the center of the office, calm but radiating a dangerous energy. He looked around at the workers, at their frightened faces. "I know you're confused," he said quietly. "You're wondering why I stopped everything for one old man." He glanced back at Papa Joe. "Let me tell you a story." The office was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Hayes took a breath and began. "Many years ago," he said, "before this building existed, before the glass walls, before the success and the money, I was not a billionaire. I was just a stubborn young man with big dreams and empty pockets." Some workers exchanged shocked looks. They had never heard their boss talk this way. "I had ideas," Mr. Hayes continued. "I had plans to build something in the entertainment industry. But ideas don't feed you. Dreams don't pay rent." He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. "And one night, everything went wrong." Papa Joe's fingers tightened around his old cap. "My business partner at the time betrayed me," Mr. Hayes said, his voice steady but filled with old pain. "He stole everything, every dollar we had raised. Then he framed me for fraud to cover his tracks. I was chased, beaten, and left on a street corner like garbage." A few people gasped quietly. "I would have died that night," Mr. Hayes said, and then he turned his head to look directly at Papa Joe. But someone stopped. All eyes followed his gaze. Papa Joe lifted his face slightly, tears filling his eyes again. "This man," Mr. Hayes said, his voice thick with emotion, "was not rich. He was not powerful. He had no important connections. He was just a construction worker finishing a late shift." Victoria's lips parted in surprise. "A group of people walked past me that night," Mr. Hayes continued. "They saw me bleeding on the ground. They looked away, just like many of you did today." The silence grew even deeper, heavier. "But Papa didn't look away," Mr. Hayes said quietly.
He stopped.
"He carried me on his back. He hid me in his small apartment. He paid for my hospital bills with money he had been saving for his granddaughter's birthday. Someone in the crowd drew a sharp breath. He saved my life, Mr. Hayes said, his voice breaking slightly. And when I recovered, when I tried to pay him back, he refused to take a single dollar from me. Mr. Hayes turned fully toward Papa Joe. You told me something that day, he said. Do you remember? Papa Joe nodded slowly, his voice shaking. I told you, he whispered, if you succeed one day, remember people like me. Remember that kindness matters more than money. Mr. Hayes closed his eyes briefly, like the memory still hurt. When I built this company, he said, opening them again, I kept that promise. I searched for Papa for years. When I finally found him, he was sick and struggling. Papa Joe lowered his head. I offered him a comfortable life, Mr. Hayes continued. Money, a house, full medical care, security, everything. He shook his head slowly. He refused it all. The office murmured in disbelief. He said, Mr. Hayes went on. Let me work. Let me stay useful. Let me have dignity, not charity. Mr. Hayes's gaze slowly moved to Victoria. So, I gave him a quiet position here. A place to move through safely. A place where he could feel valued. His voice dropped dangerously low. And, today, he was kicked like trash. Victoria's face drained of all color. I didn't know, she burst out suddenly. Sir, I swear I didn't know who he was. I thought. That, Mr. Hayes interrupted, is exactly the problem. The workers leaned in, hanging on every word. You didn't know, he continued, because you never cared to know. He was old. He looked poor. So, in your mind, he was worthless. Victoria shook her head rapidly. He was blocking the entrance. He looked confused, like he didn't belong. And that gives you the right to assault him? Mr. Hayes asked quietly, his tone making the question more devastating than any shout could be. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. You see, Mr. Hayes said, walking closer to her, this company was not built by cruelty or power games. He stopped right in front of her. It was built by sacrifice. By people like Papa who gave everything and asked for nothing. Victoria's legs trembled. But you, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, used your position to hurt someone weaker than you, someone who couldn't fight back. He turned to address all the workers. How many times, he asked, has this woman shouted at you? Threatened you? Made you feel small? Slowly, hesitantly, one hand rose. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, more than half the office had their hands raised. Victoria looked around in horror, her power crumbling before her eyes. Mr. Hayes nodded slowly. I know, he said calmly. I've been watching. I've been listening. He turned to the guards. Bring her file. One guard rushed out immediately. Victoria's breathing became fast and shallow. I work hard for this company, she said desperately, her voice cracking. I brought in major deals. I made this place profitable. I deserve respect. Respect, Mr. Hayes interrupted, is not demanded. It is earned through how you treat people, especially those who have no power over you. The guard returned quickly with a thick folder. Mr. Hayes took it and opened it slowly, scanning the pages while the entire office waited in tense silence. Then he looked up. Mrs. Victoria Cross, he said formally. Did you think your actions were invisible? Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tight. Because this file, he continued, tapping it lightly, tells a very different story. He read aloud. Multiple complaints of verbal abuse. Intimidation tactics. Threats of termination used as personal weapons. He paused. And one more thing. Victoria's eyes filled with fear. Missing funds, he said quietly. Entertainment budgets that were approved but never fully accounted for. A gasp swept through the office. That's a lie. Victoria shouted desperately. Mr. Hayes raised one finger. I am not finished, he said coldly. The room fell silent again, waiting for what would come next. Mr. Hayes closed the file with a soft thud that somehow sounded final, like a judge's gavel. You kicked Papa today, he said to Victoria. That action alone would end your career here. He paused, letting the words settle. But what comes next will follow you far beyond this office. Victoria's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Mr. Hayes turned away from her and walked back to Papa Joe. He crouched down beside the old man, his voice becoming gentle again. Papa, he said softly, forgive me for letting you suffer here, for not protecting you better. Papa Joe shook his head slowly, fresh tears falling. I forgive you, son, he whispered. But I don't understand. I don't understand why some people hate people like me so much. What did I do to deserve this? That question hung in the air like a knife, cutting through everyone's heart. Before Mr. Hayes could respond, there was a sudden, violent pounding on the glass doors.
Bang, bang, bang.
Everyone jumped. The sound was urgent, desperate. Mr. Hayes stood up sharply. The guards tensed, hands moving to their radios. A voice shouted from outside. Sir, you need to see this immediately. Mr. Hayes gestured to the guards. Open it. The locks clicked. The doors swung open, and a young security officer burst in, breathing hard, his face full of panic. Sir, the officer said quickly, almost stumbling over his words. There's something wrong. Something about Papa Joe's records. Mr. Hayes frowned. What kind of wrong? The officer swallowed hard. It's about his health records and his access to this building. Someone deleted him from the system 2 months ago. Sharp gasps filled the office. People turned slowly toward Victoria. That's impossible, Victoria said quickly, her voice tight. I didn't touch his file. Mr. Hayes's eyes locked onto hers. Then who did? Victoria's lips trembled, but she said nothing. The officer continued, his voice shaking. Sir, the system shows the order came from executive level, from Mrs. Cross's authorization code. But... He hesitated. But what? Mr. Hayes demanded. But the final approval, the officer said, came from someone higher. From Mr. Thomas Wright, your chief operating officer. The room exploded with whispers. Shock. Disbelief.
Fear.
Thomas Wright. The man everyone admired. The man who spoke at company meetings about integrity and values. The man who had shaken Papa Joe's hand once and said, Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Hayes stood completely still for a long moment, like a statue. His face showed nothing, but you could feel the storm building inside him. Are you certain? He asked quietly. The officer nodded. Yes, sir. I work in digital security. I saw the logs myself. Mrs. Cross started the process, but Mr. Wright gave the final authorization to remove Papa from all systems, including his medical coverage. Victoria suddenly laughed. It was a broken, bitter sound. You see, she said desperately, pointing with shaking fingers. You see? I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one. Mr. Hayes turned his eyes to her. She stopped laughing immediately. Do not celebrate yet, he said coldly. Then he turned to the guards. Bring Thomas right here.
Now.
One guard rushed toward the elevator. The office felt like a courtroom now, waiting for the final witness to arrive. Minutes passed. Each second felt like an hour. Victoria paced back and forth nervously. I only followed instructions, she kept saying to no one in particular. This company is tough. You have to be tough to survive here. Nobody answered her. Nobody even looked at her. Then the elevator dinged. Every head turned. The doors opened, and Thomas Wright stepped out. He was calm, too calm. His suit was perfect. His tie was straight. His face relaxed, like a man walking into a normal meeting, nothing more. He even smiled when he saw Mr. Hayes. Good morning, sir, Thomas said warmly. I was told you needed to see me urgently. Mr. Hayes studied him carefully. Thomas, he said. Do you know why you're here? Thomas glanced around the room. His eyes briefly landed on Victoria, then on Papa Joe in the chair, then back to Mr. Hayes. I heard there was some kind of incident, he said carefully. I'm sorry about the disturbance. Disturbance. The word felt like a slap to everyone who had witnessed what really happened. Mr. Hayes took a step forward. An old man was assaulted, he said. The old man who once saved my life. Thomas's smile tightened slightly. That's very unfortunate, he said. Emotions can run high in a busy workplace. Anger rippled through the watching workers. Thomas, Mr. Hayes said slowly, carefully. Did you authorize the removal of Papa Joe's access and medical benefits? Thomas didn't answer right away. He adjusted his expensive cufflinks. Then he nodded once. Yes, he said simply. I did. The room erupted.
Gasps.
Whispers. Shocked voices overlapping. How could he? He knew Papa Joe. I can't believe this. Victoria gasped. You told me it was standard procedure, she said accusingly. Thomas turned to her, his voice cold. Control yourself. Mr. Hayes raised his hand. Silence fell again instantly. Explain, Mr. Hayes said. Thomas sighed, like a man tired of explaining obvious things to simple people.
Sir, he said.
This company is growing rapidly. We can't carry emotional baggage forever. Papa Joe was old. He was sick. He had served his time. He shrugged slightly. From a pure business perspective, he was a liability. Several people shook their heads in disgust. He had no official role anymore, Thomas continued. No real function. I streamlined the system. That's what good management does. Victoria stared at Thomas like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. You told me he was nobody, she whispered. You said he was just some confused old man wandering around. Thomas looked at her with cold eyes. And you believed me. That's on you. Mr. Hayes's voice dropped to something dangerously low. You knew who he was, he said to Thomas. Didn't you? Thomas hesitated. Just for half a second. But it was enough. You knew his past, Mr. Hayes continued. You knew what he sacrificed for me. And you still chose profit over humanity. Thomas's face hardened. This is business, he said firmly. Not a charity home for the elderly. And that's when everything truly broke open. A young woman in the back suddenly stood up. Her voice shook, but it was strong. My grandmother is old, she said. If someone treated her like this, if someone kicked her and erased her like she was nothing. Her voice broke. I would never forgive them. Another worker added. You smiled at Papa Joe every morning, Mr. Wright. You said hello to him. Thomas snapped. Sit down, both of you. But Mr. Hayes raised his hand. No, he said firmly. Let them speak. Thomas looked stunned. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Mr. Hayes turned to all the workers. This company, he said, was built to be different. It was built on the idea that everyone matters, from the top executive to the person who cleans these floors at night. He pointed at Thomas. This man tried to turn it into the very place that once destroyed Papa Joe decades ago. A place where cruelty hides behind efficiency. Where human beings are treated as numbers on a spreadsheet. Thomas clenched his jaw. You wouldn't even be standing here without me, he said sharply. I helped build this empire. I made you millions. Mr. Hayes nodded slowly. Yes, he said. And that makes this betrayal so much worse. Thomas laughed bitterly. You're being emotional. That old man is clouding your judgment. The words had barely left his mouth when Mr. Hayes moved. He slammed his palm on the nearest table. The sound cracked through the office like thunder. Do not speak about him again, Mr. Hayes said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. The room went dead silent. Even Thomas stepped back slightly. Mr. Hayes took a slow breath, composing himself. Then he straightened up. Thomas Wright, he said formally. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties. Victoria gasped. Thomas's eyes widened. You can't do this, he said. I'm not finished, Mr. Hayes continued. He turned to the guards. Escort him to the conference room. Internal investigators are on their way. Thomas stepped back. This is a mistake, he said quickly. You'll regret this decision. Mr. Hayes looked him straight in the eyes. I regret keeping you this long, he replied. As the guards moved toward Thomas, he suddenly turned back with a dark, cruel smile. You think Papa is innocent, he shouted. You think he's some kind of saint? Everyone froze. Mr. Hayes's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Mr. Hayes asked slowly. Thomas laughed. There's something about your precious papa that you don't know. Something buried deep in his past. Victoria's eyes widened. Workers whispered urgently to each other. You want the full truth? Thomas called out as the guards grabbed his arms. Then ask Papa what really happened before his wife died. Ask him about the choices he made. The words hit like a bomb. Mr. Hayes stood frozen, and for the first time that morning, doubt crept into his chest.
Just then, his phone rang. He looked down.
The caller ID made his blood run cold. Memorial Hospital emergency. He answered immediately. Yes. The voice on the other end was urgent. Mr. Hayes, this is Dr. Patterson. Papa Joe has collapsed. His heart. Mr. Hayes's breath caught. Before he lost consciousness, the doctor added quickly, he asked to see you. He said there's something he must confess. 3 hours later, the hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. Papa Joe lay in the bed, tubes in his arms, oxygen mask over his face. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady. Mr. Hayes sat beside him, holding the old man's weathered hand. Papa Joe's eyes opened slowly. When he saw Mr. Hayes, tears immediately filled them. You came, Papa Joe whispered. I'll always come, Mr. Hayes replied softly. Papa Joe took a shaky breath. That man, Thomas, he was right about one thing. There is something I never told you. Mr. Hayes leaned closer. Whatever it is, it doesn't change what you did for me. Let me speak, Papa Joe said gently. Before I don't have the chance anymore. Mr. Hayes nodded, his throat tight. The company you bought to build Sterling Media, Papa Joe began, was the same company that destroyed my life 30 years ago. Mr. Hayes's eyes widened. I was accused of stealing, Papa Joe continued. But I didn't do it. I saw who did, a manager, but I stayed silent because he threatened my family. Tears rolled down his cheeks. My wife got sick shortly after I was fired. We had no money, no insurance, and she died because I was too afraid to speak the truth when it mattered. Mr. Hayes squeezed his hand. You were scared. That's human. Thomas worked under that manager, Papa Joe whispered. He learned cruelty from him, and when he got power, he continued the same cycle. Papa Joe looked at Mr. Hayes with deep sadness. I thought if I stayed quiet and just worked quietly here, I could make up for my silence. But silence doesn't fix things. It just lets cruelty grow. Your kindness saved my life, Mr. Hayes said firmly. That truth is bigger than any mistake. Papa Joe smiled faintly. Then promise me something. Anything. Don't let people become invisible in your company. Don't let power make people cruel. I promise, Mr. Hayes said. Papa Joe closed his eyes peacefully. The beeping continued, steady and strong. 1 week later, the main hall of Sterling Media was packed. Cameras from news stations lined the walls. Every employee stood watching. Mr. Hayes stood at a podium. Behind him was a large photograph of Papa Joe, smiling gently. Papa Joe taught me something I had forgotten, Mr. Hayes said. That every person deserves dignity. That power means nothing if we use it to hurt the powerless. He turned slightly. Victoria Cross and Thomas Wright are no longer with this company. Their actions are being investigated fully.
He paused.
But more importantly, today we're launching the Papa Joe Foundation. It will provide health care, legal protection, and dignity for elderly workers everywhere. The hall erupted in applause. A plaque was unveiled on the wall, built on sacrifice, led by kindness. Later, Mr. Hayes stood alone in the quiet office, looking at the spot where Papa Joe had fallen. You walked in invisible, he whispered, but you left teaching us how to see. And somewhere, Papa Joe was smiling.